All right, evening everyone. Please be seated. All right. I hope everyone's doing well this evening, this Wednesday evening, as we're here and continuing in the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program Teacher Certification course here. And will beg my pardon here. I forgot to bring some lemon water up here with me this afternoon. So just a little bit of sinus congestion, but we'll make it through it. We are going to be continuing in Chapter 5. There is purpose to it all. And of course, if you've had the opportunity to join us for the previous classes with the previous teachers, we've covered quite a bit of information in here and understanding purpose. And, this is... this is one of my best liked chapters in regards to understanding our purpose. Purposes and goals, they're so important in life. And when you're young, a lot of times you don't really think about purpose, right? You don't think about having goals. Most times people are just living for the weekend. Can't wait to get rid of or get out of Monday so we can hurry up and get back to Friday so we can party all weekend and then get back to work and do it all over again. That's for young people, and it's also for a lot of adults, right? They just live for the weekend, and so it's kind of kind of short-sighted in regards to their goals. But there are greater things that are in life that we should be working to strive towards. And in going over this information that we're covering here in the Peaceful Solution, we can see and understand, and we can start to get some direction in regards to if we've never had a goal. Right? If we ever never had or understood what our purpose was, or even considered, right? What is it that I want to do with my life? Sometimes people don't ever think those things because they're never asked those questions, right? And so they go, well, I never really took the time to consider it. Now, as teachers, which is what we're training for, it's really up to us to stimulate these thought processes in the minds of our students. I was thinking as I was preparing for class this evening, that when you think about some of the most powerful people in the world, most people might think, well, yes, a president of the United States, or the Secretary General of the United Nations, or, somebody who owns a multi-trillion-dollar company, their CEO of a multi-trillion-dollar company, someone in the position of the government who oversees certain things. Those are some of the most powerful people in the world, and to some degree, they do wield a lot of power and influence in the things that they do. But I was thinking simplistically, when we think about the phrase that we've used many times, and if you've if you've just joined us for the first time in this second unit here of the Peaceful Solution, which is the acceptance unit. On page 11, there's a statement here that says knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. So when you think about that statement, where do we generally get knowledge from? We generally get it from teachers. In some way, even if a person doesn't have a degree, so to speak, a bachelor's or a master's degree in education, that doesn't disqualify them from being a teacher, right? Because in every situation and in various times throughout the day, we've all sat in a position of a teacher, right? And we've had the opportunity to impart some knowledge, because that's a part of what teachers do. They impart knowledge to other people. Now, like everything we've learned from the beginning, chapter 1 of the character unit, all the way up to where we are right now, in unit 2 here, everything falls into two categories: positive or negative, right? So just because a person is in a position of a teacher doesn't mean that they're always going to fall into the category of a positive teacher. Because as we read in the character unit, we saw some examples of leaders who are also teachers. Now, they weren't sitting in a schoolroom in front of a chalkboard, but they were teaching people. They were teaching people about certain values that they held true, that in some instances, those values were very, very negative, and they led to the murder of 6 million plus people, right? And in some of those instances, those values influence people to take planes and fly them into buildings, right? Or to go into a building and try to blow it up, right? And so these are some of the things that we see in regards to the different types of teachers that are in society. But one of the things that I was thinking about in regards to this statement, as far as some of the most powerful people in the world, it kind of simplistically in my mind brought me back to, what a teacher is. A teacher imparts knowledge. And with that knowledge, as we've understood in the Peaceful Solution, comes power, right? And that power that we have is the ability to make a sound moral decision in any situation. A decision to choose peace when everybody else around us is choosing war, is choosing to retaliate, is choosing to take advantage of others, is choosing to steal, is choosing to do harm and violence, right? It takes a person of moral character and integrity to stand up for what's right. So we're going to go back here. We're in Unit 2. And we're in Chapter 5. And the title of this one is, of course, There is Purpose to It All. Let's look back. Procedure 6. We're on Lesson Plan 5, page D. And we'll look at Procedure 6. Because we covered the previous pages last class. We stopped off here at 96. Yeah, 96. We finished up with page 96 there, talking about free time, right? And the importance of how we choose to spend our free time, right? And how what is normal doesn't necessarily equate to what is right? What is moral, what is acceptable. And remember we looked at some of the different styles of dress, and I don't see anybody in bell bottoms and fly-wing collars in here this evening. Not that there would have been anything wrong with that, but if we were sitting in this workshop right now in 1970, we very well might see that. We're talking about the importance of dress and how dress and styles of dress change over periods of time. Well, so do these other things. Like we gave the example of some of the pastimes of a lot of teenagers is going to the mall and making fun of people as they walk by. Okay, and like I said, malls are, they're still in existence, but they're not quite as popular as they were when I was growing up. Malls were a very, very popular place to go and hang out, right? And most of the time when you have teenagers hanging out together, for the most part, they're not up to anything beneficial, right? And so sitting there and making fun of people, you think about the things that puts in the minds of those teenagers. Because when you make fun of somebody, you are in effect showing disrespect. And so when you have a group of them showing that disrespect, they kind of strengthen that ideology that disrespect is not only okay, but it's fun. And so what occurs when they get into a group and they're not sitting in the mall, and they're maybe at school or possibly even in a classroom, because they say, well, there's strength in numbers, right? And that could be in a positive way, and that could be in a negative way. A wolf pack finds strength in numbers too, but they'll also go and attack a human if they're hungry enough. They'll go and attack a house animal, a domesticated animal, a cow or someone's cattle or something like that. So that strength can be used to do either positive or negative. It all depends on the character of the individuals. Okay, but this knowledge that we're talking about here, what we're learning from the character education here, like I said before, it's able to strengthen the mind and make you powerful to a point where, no one would ever be able to shake your mind off of the path of building and maintaining a positive character, irregardless of what takes place in your life. Because as we covered in the first 3 chapters of Unit 1 there, there in life you're going to be met with many, many setbacks. You're going to be met with many challenges, many pitfalls, curveballs, and so forth in life. Life is not perfect. As much as we would love for it to be and everything to go smoothly every day, that's not realistic, right? And remember what we talk about in setting goals, we must set realistic, achievable, attainable goals, okay? And like it was covered previously, I was trying to think of the way it was worded, irregardless of I was just listening to, I was going back and listening to a class today, and then one of the teachers mentioned it. If I think about it, I'll mention it. But basically, life is filled with setbacks and things that are beyond our control, and that's a part of what we're learning here in this acceptance unit. Is that there are things that we just have to accept in life, right? There are things that are beyond our control that we have no influence on, okay? But one of the things that we do have the ability to control and influence are the choices that we make, are the things that we allow into our mind, how we respond to things, whether it's a situation that we've heard about, or whether it's something or a way in which someone, directly conducted themselves towards us, if it was disrespect, right? We are the only ones that can control how we respond to those situations. And, we talk a little bit about, certain things like, how we look and, fixed characteristics and traits and things of that nature. But the most important thing out of all of this is the building and maintaining of a positive character. And our character, along with our reputation, is seen through the choices that we make on a regular basis, right? It's seen through our behavior, right? And our behavior is just a series of choices that we make, every day in our minds, right? No one has to look at you and go, you made that particular choice. When you're educated, you know that a person acts a certain way because A, they were educated, they were trained, that was a part of their environment, that contributed to a factor that contributed to influencing the things that they value. And B, that's partly how they're choosing to act. Now you think about it, because how many of us in this room have ever been angry by a show of hands or upset with something, right? I think most of us have. And sometimes, personally, I can speak from personal experience, sometimes, it really feels great just to hold on to that anger, right? It really felt great just to, see that person just, well, I said I'm sorry, what can I do? Is there anything I can do for you, to see them grovel? Now I'm not talking about anything recent. I'm talking long before I learned about the peaceful solution, right? For some reason it was like a satisfaction in holding on to that anger, right? But at the end of the day, I didn't do anything beneficial for myself or for that person, right? I only brought more harm to myself and even more hurt to the individual who probably, if the shoes were reversed, they probably would have quickly forgiven me, right? So sometimes it feels great to do the wrong thing. But that's what we have to train our students to recognize, not to make decisions based on how it feels. Make their decisions based on what's right and what's wrong, what's moral and what's immoral. Like we covered in chapter 1, that dividing line, moral principles are the dividing line that separate right behavior from wrong behavior. And once they can get that foundation locked down, then it becomes, their decision-making process becomes a lot easier, because now they're not guessing, right? They're not looking at a situation and then making a determination based on how they feel about it, because that can be very easy to do. But society teaches you, do what feels good, do what feels right. Well, how does this make you feel? Okay, and feelings, emotions, they come and go, and sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're negative. But we have to really emphasize, and I don't want to, like I said, you can't really overemphasize the fact, especially with what we've seen in society today and the influences of everybody's doing it, that a child, a person, an adult, any type of student, they can't make decisions based on emotions or feelings. They have to go back to the moral principles and then decide what's beneficial and what's harmful. So let's look at Procedure 6 here. Procedure 6, again, Lesson Plan 5, page D. And we're looking at an activity here. This is Activity 1, and it's entitled Positive and Negative Choices. Ask students to turn to page 97 in their handbooks and categorize the following activities, choices, and character traits into the column entitled positive. Sorry about that. I start talking, I get the phlegm in the back. Entitled positive choices, or the column entitled negative choices. Discuss with students the need to be aware of how they spend their time and who they spend it with. And we talked a little bit about that in the previous class and how important. We read a little bit of an article about how successful people spend their time and why it's important to do certain things in your free time. One of the things was educating themselves, reading, right? Mastering a skill and so forth. Doing things that build their minds. And there's a lot of things that many people have written much information on about strengthening your mind, educating your mind, putting more knowledge into your mind, right? Our minds aren't like our cell phones, where you buy a cell phone nowadays and you get 256 gig or 512. I think now you can get 1 terabyte of 1 terabyte of storage space. Well, you're still limited to the amount of information that you can store in that particular phone. Science has done numerous studies on the human mind, and it is still something that baffles them. They're constantly, neuroscientists and so forth are constantly finding out new information about the human mind and its capacity, to store information, right? You can store more information in one tiny little neuron, which you can't even see with the naked eye, than you can in several encyclopedic volumes of books. And this is just in one neuron. And if you train your mind, you can grab hold of that information at the speed of light. At the speed of light, right? Sometimes I think our minds work a lot faster than computers today, especially when they get viruses and things like that in them. But this is the power of our mind. And so this is why it's important to be careful how you spend your spare time, and encourage our students to make sure that they're spending their spare time with people who are going to encourage and motivate them to make positive choices. Because in a lot of cases, that's when many people, they get into trouble on the weekends, because now we're free of school, right? And we can go out and have fun and do whatever we do whatever we want to do. And so they get into trouble. So it says here, allow students to evaluate how they spend their time by answering the questions found on page 98, which we'll read after this. And of course, as you go through this in your teaching, this might be something that this activity that we're going to be looking at today, this might be something that you might want to save to the end of the class, right? The last 15 or 20 minutes of the class, if you have a 45 or an hour minute class with your students, or you might use it as kind of like an icebreaker to kind of get things rolling for the very next class. It depends on where it falls and how you as a teacher kind of gauge your students and kind of getting them involved in these things, because for the most part, these activities are a great way to get feedback from you, the teacher, as to how the students are grasping and comprehending the information that's presented. But then it's also something exciting that they can do, right? But it's not a time-wasting exciting thing. It's a time-building. It's a knowledge-building exciting thing that they can learn while they're having a great time. So, try not to skip over these things, because they're very beneficial in the classes. Let me see here. Remind students that how they choose to spend their free time is something they do have control over, so of course they want to spend it wisely. All right, so let's turn in our books to page 97. 97. And we're going to look underneath there, identifying conformity. All right, and remember what we talked about conformity here um, on page on page 96. Yes, page 96 under conformity there at the very, 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 very top sentence there, we see that conformity as defined in the peaceful solution here is to agree with and obey the customs and standards of others, right? And remember what we talked about last class in regards to the definition of the word normal, right? That's customs and standards and so forth that are considered acceptable, right? And again, those things change over a period of time. But like I said, remember, it's important to remind your students of this. Normal does not always mean moral. So looking at identifying conformity, and underneath that it says, the following activities, choices, and character traits can either help you achieve or hinder your purpose in life. Help you achieve or hinder your purpose in life. And just keep all that in mind as what we've covered previously in regards to understanding our purpose. And this is where, get my book laid out properly here. This is where, you can go back pretty much to the beginning of the chapter on page 87, where it gives the definition of purpose, which means to have purpose in life means to have a positive direction in which to grow and mature. Knowing your purpose helps you to know what you want to do with your life. All right, so a positive direction in which to grow and mature. So underneath that, it says, categorize the list below into the appropriate columns. And of course, we have two columns there. The one on the left is positive choices, and the one on the left are negative choices. And of course, as a teacher, reading in the teacher's manual, we have all the answers here. But your students in the student's manual, or if you make a copy out of a student's manual, a student's workbook, they're not going to have these answers here. So this gives an opportunity for them to look at these these choices and these character traits, and from what they've learned in the peaceful solution, categorize them. Now, again, I remind you, they might not get all of these right. And I know it's, a person can go, man, how could they not get something right, right? Everybody learns at different paces, okay? And so we never want to discourage the student or embarrass them or make them feel bad, if they place something in a category that was improper. In fact, as a teacher, it would just be great to allow them to go over this by themselves as you read out the correct answers, okay? And that can kind of cut down on embarrassment as well, because you don't ever want a student to feel embarrassed by their answer, because remember, what they're doing here is they're learning to develop a positive character. So before we've started teaching them, they've already learned to a certain point certain aspects that have led to the development of their character for what it is at that point. And that's going to be a combination of both positive and negative things, right? So our job isn't to condemn them because of certain of those negative characteristics, but just to simply point them out and to point them in the right direction so that they can start to make positive changes for themselves. So we'll look at some of these things here. And remember, these are activities, choices, and character traits, all right? So we have three separate things here, but they either fall in the category of positive or negative. So one of them is thinking positively. Thinking positively. Now you probably wouldn't think much about that, and there's sometimes people who will make fun of people who think positively because they've always are striving to be optimistic, right? And they call them, the goody two shoes and this and that, but there are just some people who just kind of by nature, or maybe it's just the way they grew up, right? Their parents always tried to see the positive side of things. And so they, in turn, interact with life in much the same way. But when we understand, which we're going to get much heavier into when we get into the next unit 3 on self-control, the the importance of controlling our thoughts, right? How important it is to control our thoughts. And that right there, understanding that you do have control over your thoughts, is a very powerful piece of information. Because it's really easy to go, well, I don't know, I just did it. Right? I just did it. I kind of saw this take place, and I just acted, right? And it's real easy to just throw something out there like that and not take into consideration that no, you actually went through a thought process before that action came to pass. And this is one of the most, in all the years that we've been teaching the Peaceful Solution, we've heard so many powerful testimonials from people who went through the self-control unit, and it was like a life-changing experience for them. Because they realized that they had way more control over how they thought, felt, and act than society gave them credit for. Okay? But again, this is something that we have to teach. This is something that has to be learned. This is the knowledge that has to be imparted by the teacher to the student so they can have the power to control how they think, feel, and act. But thinking positively is very beneficial. It has very, very beneficial results that come with it as well. People who always have the way I like to say it is a dark cloud over their head. They're really kind of depressing to be around, right? Because the more you try to build them up, right, to lift them up and to encourage them, they still just want to kind of go right back to that negative way of thinking. And, they find that they don't have a lot of people that want to hang out with them and so forth, because people tend to like to be around people who make them feel great, right? And that's kind of the general way that humans are. Sometimes misery does love company, but for the most part, people like to be lifted up when they're not feeling great, okay? And so as a student, you might have to work a little extra harder, as somebody who is being negative, with your positive thinking to build them up. So here's another one here: obeying rules. That's another activity or choice, I guess I should say, that will fall into the positive column. Staying in school. Stay in school. That is so that you can get your education, or not running around playing hooky, as we used to call it growing up, playing hooky or cutting classes, to go out and have fun, right? And go to places that you're not supposed to be at during the day, and then they have to call the cops because there's a whole bunch of teenagers walking around in the mall in the middle of a school day, right? And it's pretty obvious because they all got backpacks on. So, what are they up to? A lot of places don't even allow students to enter their business establishments with backpacks, because things tend to go missing quite quickly occasionally. So staying in school, that's a positive one. Then we've got prejudice. That obviously falls into a negative column, the negative choices columns. And again, you can, depending on the feedback you get from your students, this would be a great opportunity to remind them about chapter 2, which is accepting diversity, because we deal with intolerance in that chapter. And prejudice kind of falls down into that category of intolerance, right? Because people will tend to prejudge another person based on how they look, based on the color of their skin, based on, what nationality they are, or how they speak, right? How they sound. Maybe they're not in the same financial bracket that another person is in, right? And then they automatically prejudge them and think that they have less value and worth as the person doing the prejudging, because they fall into a different category. Well, in that chapter there, and you can go back over it, or you can point things out to the students, or maybe take the whole class back and read certain points, especially if you see something like that taking place in the class, and just remind them of those concepts that were covered, and why it's important to get to know other people, not to judge people just because they're a little bit different than you, right? Uniqueness is I think it's very beautiful. I guess if I grew up in a society where we all looked exactly the same, then that's probably what we'd be used to. But I say variety is the spice of life, right? And I like meeting new people. I like learning about people and their cultures and how they grew up, right? Everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a background, right? About how they grew up, and sometimes it might be in a different country. It might be in a different part of the state. They might have grown up very poor. They might have grown up very wealthy. Who knows, right? And so you'll never know that. The student will never know. They'll never know that there's potentially a really, really, really great, trustworthy friend in that person if they just look at them and go, well, that person looks different than me. I don't want to have anything to do with them. Okay? And so this is why it's important that we lay this foundation, and this is why we had, a whole chapter devoted to accepting diversity, right? Because everybody is different. There's nothing wrong with being different. All right, and so another one here is abusing alcohol, which obviously would fall into negative choices, and we did cover a little bit about that in the previous lessons, and showing what does take place in the minds of the students when they do engage in these risk-taking behaviors. Alcohol is one, drugs are another. The next one here is staying a virgin. And we've read this, we've gone over this in previous workshops and classes that we've had with some students, and some students actually laughed at that. They actually laughed at that because in society, remember we talked about the many different influences that young people and old people alike are constantly bombarded with, from movies, the television, internet, right? Video games. All these things are constant influences that are in a person's mind, even just billboard advertisements, right? That are still a very, very popular form of influencing in society today. But all these things are influencing people and pushing people towards, sex. More and more and more of it. Like I said before, do what feels great, and that's the drive to sell more products, right? And it's used to grab the attention of a person, right, towards a particular product. But that one act of grabbing that attention, it doesn't just stop right there. Now a seed of thought has been planted in the person's mind, and if they see certain things, now they're looking at a way to go about fulfilling that desire or that inquisitiveness that they have about this particular thing that they saw. Okay, but there's nothing wrong with a person staying a virgin until they get married. That's what we covered. William covered in the last session that he taught in regards to premarital sex. We talked about it here on page 96 at that very top paragraph. And by abstaining or abstinence, right, there are a lot of things that you can save yourself from. And one of the things that was covered in his class was the STDs. Now, one of the things that people don't think about, and especially a lot of young people, unless they're directly impacted themselves, right, is how prevalent STDs are in our society. Most people think about, herpes and syphilis and gonorrhea and chlamydia. They treat it just like the average cold. That's how it is in their minds, right? Oh, I got a case of the clap. I'll just go get a shot, then I'll be back in business. Right? That's the way they think about it. But again, that's what they've been trained to believe. That it's listen, we can just cure that with little antibiotics, and you can be back in the saddle again. But the problem with that way of thinking is the facts that are given to them are not true facts. Right? Remember William talked about the difference between true facts and false facts. The fact is that many of these STDs that are very prevalent, millions and millions of new cases every year, and we talked about this in previous classes, the millions, not thousands, the millions of young people ages, I think 15 through 24, who are newly contractors or newly contracting these STDs. and then they go out and want to engage in other people, with other people, spreading these things more and more and more. So there's nothing wrong with staying a virgin until you get married, and then you've gone through that process of choosing friends, right? And making sure that the person that you are going to marry is working on and has been working on and working to maintain a positive character, right? Because you wouldn't want to go through all that work in developing a positive character and protecting your mind from risk-taking behaviors and the influences that come with just making random impulsive choices, the consequences that come from doing those types of things, and then go and marry somebody who's going to drag you right back down into everything that you've worked so hard to avoid. This is why it's important that each person, both the man and the woman, educate themselves on what they should be looking for in a partner. Because, the wife, as well as the husband, they should be a friend to both persons, right? And they should remember what we, let me see here. Let me write that down. I think it's back here on page 61. Let me see here. Yeah, wait. Yes, 61 and 62. When you think about that, when a person does get married, that their partner should be a friend to them. And then we'll just remind you here on page 61 of what we talk about here, the definition of what we look for or consider a friend. And it says here under introduction, it says, do you know what can occur when you develop and maintain communication and interaction with others? You can form strong, lasting friendships. Interaction where there is mutual respect, and there has to be that in any relationship, especially with someone who you're, extremely close to, as in the case of a husband or a wife, right? You must have mutual respect for both parties. And their possessions results in opportunities to get to know, appreciate, and value someone to the point where you can call him or her a friend, okay? And look down to the last paragraph here at the very bottom on page 61. It says, in this lesson, you will learn the importance of friendships. You will learn also that the most important thing friends can do is to encourage and motivate each other to make choices that will support their positive growth and development. Now you think about when a person gets into a relationship and the other individual has not been working on building a positive character, and the other person is faced with having to make a moral decision. How can the other person encourage them to make the right choice? They can't. What do they have? What information do they have to give to them to help them to encourage them and motivate them to develop and maintain a positive character? They have nothing, because they haven't been taught it. So this is why it's important that we choose people whose characters and whose processes of thinking are pretty similar to ours in regards to building a positive character. On page 62 at the very top, it says, real friends encourage you to do what is right. And underneath who is a friend, it says a friend is one who supports, respects, encourages, and accepts you as a unique individual. All right, so let's go back to page 97 there. So that's positive. The next thing is getting an education, which is also very positive. Long as you're getting the right education, that definition of educated in the Peaceful Solution is not just getting education. It's getting the education or getting the information or getting the facts and making sure that they are what? Correct. Making sure that they are correct, which means you might have to put a little extra effort in verifying. There are entire groups of people that work to fact check. I'm sure you've probably heard on the news. I hear it a lot on NPR, National Public Radio. When a story comes out, then they have like one or two people who is their fact checker, right? So they'll bring out a story and they'll say, so we've turned this over to our such and such associate, our fact checker, who did a little bit of investigating for us, right? And they'll do some digging and they'll find out yes, this information is accurate, or no, it was just some BuzzFeed, right? To garner attention for a particular cause or whatever. So, this whole business of building a positive character, it's not like a get rich quick scheme, right? It's not a get great character quick type of scheme. We have to actually work at it. And this is something that we have to remind our students that, because it's not an instant overnight process. It takes a lot of hard work and effort to work to develop a positive character. And so getting an education is also another one of those things that were listed underneath the what successful people do with their spare time article that we read last class. All right, another one here that's positive. So then another one here is bad language, which falls under negative category. Sometimes these things can be very offensive to some people, especially if they grew up in a household where that type of language was not used. And I've seen instances where young people will take certain things home to their families because they heard it in school, right? Or because they heard it on the playground, or they heard it, in the movie or whatever, right? And then not knowing what that means, they'll just go out because they saw it used in a particular way and they thought it was cool or they thought it was funny. And next thing you know, you've got to, have censor buttons all over your house because your child's beep, 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 saying all types of things because they heard it from someone else. And this is, again, we can't underestimate the power of influences. And as teachers, which is what we're all training here for, we have to be very, very, very mindful of the things we say, especially when we think we're, by ourselves or maybe talking to another teacher or something like that. We should really be working on governing our tongue and our language to begin with. But sometimes, teachers will talk to each other a little bit differently than they'll talk to their students, right? Not necessarily a bad thing, but they might be a little bit looser. But they have to be very careful when they're interacting with others, because all it takes is somebody walking by and hearing something, and next thing you know, they're going back and repeating those things. So bad language falls into that negative choice. Disobeying rules is also another one. Shoplifting and stealing, also falls into negative choices. In fact, I looked it up again before I came up this afternoon, and just in regards to theft from retail stores, not, grand larceny and burglary, breaking into homes, not embezzlement from companies, Ponzi schemes, not including any of those things. Just from retail stores, it costs consumers, American consumers, just America, and this takes place all over the world, $33.21 billion a year. It costs us that much because of retail theft that takes place on a daily basis. So I don't know about you, but I don't like the fact that my prices are constantly going up in the store for the things that I have need of, and that I have to take care of my family with. I mean, it's constantly going up. And I know that there's, a lot of economic things going on with COVID and so forth, but even before COVID, right, food prices and essential prices of essential things that we need have been steadily going up. Well, retailers have to cover the cost of that theft, right, in their bottom line. So what do? They jack up the price and pass it on to the consumer, right? Because they're not going to take that loss. So in effect, we as consumers suffer the negative ripple effect because someone did not practice self-control, or they weren't educated to practice self-control, and went in and dishonestly took something that didn't belong to them. So we could imagine $33.21 billion a year, right? Imagine throughout all of the purchasing that takes place on a daily basis, everything costing $33.21 billion a year less, right? How much more beneficial that would be, how much more money you'd have in your pocket, in addition to everything else that if people weren't stealing from homes and companies and in other ways, the amount that we would be saving as well. Wouldn't have to be paying that expensive security system bill, right? Or paying for, a guard at a particular place of establishment. or whatever it might be. So that's a negative one. And then we've got being responsible, which falls into a positive choice. Joining a gang, negative. Being honest, cheating, being steadfast, modest dress, which is very important, self control, provocative dress, which is the opposite of modest dress, helping others, bullying, sex before marriage, respecting the privacy of others, gossiping, violent entertainment, following instructions, and smoking. All right. And you'll probably find that depending on how close you are to your class and how open they are with you, and depending on the environment, every class is different. Some are big, some are small. Um, you'll find that probably a lot of these things, many of the students have partook in, or might even be actively partaking in. Hopefully, by this point in the lesson, they've ceased those immoral, harmful behaviors, but they very well might be. So, this again gives us an opportunity to just point out by categorizing the difference between what's positive and what's negative. So this gives them a visual to be able to see these things and hopefully, examine themselves, examine what they do, examine the things that they might see in their environment at home. Maybe they're not doing that, but they see these things taking place at home. They hear these things being talked about at home. There are environments where parents are involved in theft, where parents are involved with the selling or the trafficking of illegal substances, illegal drugs, right? And they openly talk about these things in front of their children. Okay, and these are influences to their children as well. Now, their children might not be doing it, all right? They might not be involved in drugs, but these are influences, things that they are seeing on a regular basis, and whether they realize it or not, it does affect them, okay? All right, so let's look over to page 98 here, because this is where we talk a little bit about how the student, at the very top there, it says, write on the lines below. Now, this, of course, again, depending on how your class will be structured, you might want to, make copies of this and pass it out. Or if the student, maybe doesn't want to write in her book, however it works out. Or this might be something that a teacher can actually give as a homework assignment to take home, so that they can go over these 4 questions here, which is write on the lines below what you typically spend your free time doing. Is it negative or positive? Then answer the questions that follow. And then the 4 questions that are given here is, my free time is usually spent doing the following things. And depending on what time allows, and if you have any volunteers, right, who might want to come up to the class and come up to the front of the class or raise their hand, and they can give their examples. Now, as a teacher, in today's day and age, you might want to go over your students' answers, possibly, just to make sure they don't say anything that's inappropriate. Hopefully, at this point, they're not, but you've always got the class clown who wants to make everybody laugh. So take that into consideration. My free time is usually spent doing the following things is question number 1. And number 2 is, based on your answers above, would you consider this time wasted or time well spent? Now, again, this gets them to thinking about how they spend their free time. Depending on the student, they might look at all the questions first and then maybe formulate question 1 based on the answers they're going to have to give for the following questions. Most people are just so excited to write down the answer to question 1 that when they get to question 2, now they've got to stop and think about it, right? Is this time wasted or time well spent? Number 3 is, if it's time wasted, what other choices could you make that would better utilize your time? So now they have to start thinking about different options that are available. Maybe they can't think of anything. If I've heard it once, I've heard 1,000 times from young people, I'm bored. I don't know what to do. And what's most parents' responses? Well, you could go clean your room. That's boring too, But they'll have to think about some of the things or some of the different options or choices that they could make where they could better utilize their time. Whether it's reading a book that educates them in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's getting involved with a building project, or maybe even volunteering their time, helping others to do particular things. Maybe it's going out and mowing the yard, or helping out in the neighborhood, and seeing if they can mow other people's yards, helping them to be kind of be like entrepreneurial or something like that. There's other things that young people can do if they start kind of thinking outside the box, that can be time well spent and beneficial, and a help, to themselves and others. A lot of times I know I was encouraged when I was younger, to go and do that. There's a lot of elderly people who had yards and they had lawnmowers, but they weren't physically able to go out and mow the lawn, right? So there was things that could be done with the proper permission, salt, and so forth, where you can go and you can cut, the grass of the elderly people, or possibly the handicapped people who weren't able to do that. And it's very much appreciative, and you're spending your time in a beneficial way. And then lastly, number 4 is does how you spend your time help you achieve your purpose? So this brings them back to, the very beginning of the chapter. Is this helping them in understanding a positive direction in which to grow and mature? Right? Is this helping them to accomplish that goal? Right? If it's not, then they need to reassess that. Because more than likely, if they're doing it, it's because they value it. So this takes us all the way back to the character unit in evaluating our values, right? And reevaluating those things. Okay, so I think this is a great project here, even for a homework project, because this way the student will have the opportunity to really stop and think about, these answers that are being presented here, and they can formulate things that are really, thought-provoking. All right, so let's look down at the very bottom here, because now we have some tips here that are beneficial, that would kind of follow this lesson here, this activity that we just went over here, that talk about the difference between time builders and time busters. And we have 3 points on each side here, and we're going to first take a look at, we'll look at both of them. We'll go latitudinally across from one to the other, so we can compare the two. But let's look over to the left here. We got this time builders guy, and then over to the right we've got the time busters guy, kind of like one's Hans and Franz, and the other one is a scrawny little guy over at the right, because he's not doing anything that will build and strengthen his time. Think about it this way, and this is something you can remind your students of. When we do things to build our time and to build our mind, it's like strengthening your mind. Many examples have been given as the mind as being like a muscle. Now, it's not a muscle that, muscles work by contracting. The shorter the muscle gets, that's how muscles work. Their strength is in their ability to contract, right? And the mind doesn't contract, but it's able to be exercised by putting knowledge into it, and then putting that knowledge into practice, right? When we learn these concepts from the peaceful solution, this information can be looked at as like weight, right? It's like a weight. And the more we look, the more we learn, the more weight that we're piling on that barbell. That's not a dumbbell, it's a smart bell, right? Because you're getting smarter. And so the more we practice this, when we run into a situation, or when we're faced with having to make a moral choice, the stronger our minds become, okay? And it gets to a point where, not that you don't have to think about it, but it becomes so ready at the forefront of your mind that you can respond pretty quickly with a positive choice. So some time builders here. Number 1 is a person could read a book or study, okay? A time buster, or opposite of that, would be watching TV shows with explicit sex or violence, right? That, the one strengthens the mind. Reading does a lot. If you ever get the opportunity, go look up the benefits of how your mind grows from reading as compared to watching a television. When you watch a television, all you've got to do is sit back and look. That's all you've got to do, right? And not to say that there aren't some very beneficial things that could be shown on television, documentaries, or even, people that are watching this right now, on Facebook Live, right? Um, but watching things that have explicit sex or violence in them, all those things, when your mind is in a very relaxed state, it's easier for information to penetrate into the subconscious mind. And remember, the subconscious mind, like we covered previously, it's not objective. It doesn't look at this guy getting shot 50 times by the big bad, hero of the movie as something negative, right? It doesn't look at these explicit scenes that are being broadcast on the television or in the movie, as something that you shouldn't be watching. All it does is see it and it takes it in. It's your conscious mind that has to look at that and separate that between what's positive and negative, okay? So when people are in a relaxed state and they watch these things, they become more a part of them. And this is why it's important to govern how you spend your time to make sure that it's building your mind and not tearing it down. Number 2 here, the second arrow is take up a positive hobby such as gardening, art, carpentry, sewing, singing, playing a musical instrument. And there could be a lot of different things, that could be added to that. But something that's positive, something that's beneficial. You might want to, help out in building a building project around the house, or a child could get permission from their father. Maybe they've got a family member who owns a construction company. Maybe they could help out or something in the evenings after school, and they finish their homework and chores to learn a little bit about carpentry or roofing or electrical or plumbing or whatever. Learning a trade, learning something that's going to be beneficial to them. On the flip side of that, a time buster would be playing violent video games. Remember, again, these things go into the subconscious mind, and over a period of time, they become what a person values in response, and how they respond, right? Seeing this violence in the video game, because remember, when you're playing a video game, unlike a television where you're just sitting back and looking at it, you are an active participant in that game, right? And that controller's in your hand, and you need your mind to do that controller, work that controller. And sometimes people are working the controllers like this, they really get involved in it, right? Physically involved in it. And your subconscious mind is seeing that as something that you're actually doing. Behind that in that first person shooter game or whatever, right? Behind that weapon, and they're shooting that weapon at people and, blowing people's heads off and things of that nature. That's going into the subconscious mind, and it's interesting because there are agencies that are using these forms of entertainment to train people how to kill. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And the last time builder is assist your family and community. Assist your family and community, and it could be in, like I said, many different things. Sometimes people are a part of neighborhood programs that help to clean up the neighborhood. Some people were involved in the I think William, one time they had a group or the Peaceful Solution had an Adopt a Highway program, if I'm not mistaken. That was down down in Laredo area. And what you do is you go out and you clean up the highway. I mean, you clean up along the side of the highway, pick up paper and trash and so forth. So when the TxDOT or whoever came through to cut the grass, then it was all nice and clean. And that was a beneficial thing in helping out the community, right? But on the other side, the negative side will be sitting around by yourself or with friends just doing nothing, doing absolutely nothing. Again, and that's a time buster or a time waster. So these are things that you can go over with your students there, and really make it exciting, really make it fun, get the input from them, and see what they're grasping and what they might need a little bit of work on, and then patiently work with them and build their mind with this information, because as teachers, like I say, we have a very great responsibility in training the minds of our future leaders to make positive choices. So we're going to stop right there on page 98, and we'll pick up on page 99, test, prove, and stand firm for next class, which will be Sunday, October 31st at 5:30 Central Standard Time. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next class.